He was trained to save lives, but was sold like he was worth less than a broken chair. The air inside the county surplus facility smelled of rust and old rain, a thin metallic scent that clung to the back of your throat like something forgotten, something no one wanted to remember. And in the far corner, behind a row of dented cages and flickering fluorescent lights, Rex stood motionless, his body still as stone, his ears alert, his amber eyes scanning every movement as if waiting for a command that would never come. The tag on his collar catching the pale light, scratched and worn, the word K9 barely visible beneath a stamped serial number that no one bothered to read anymore. And above his enclosure, a paper sign hung crookedly with 2 words typed in bold black ink. Rejected unit, the letters slightly smudged, as if even the printer had hesitated before marking him that way. And people passed by without slowing, their footsteps echoing across the concrete floor, some glancing in his direction with mild curiosity, others not looking at all, because it was easier that way. Easier to ignore a story you didn't want to understand, easier to believe the label than question the silence behind it. And Rex did not bark, did not whine, did not lower his gaze. He simply stood, breathing slow and steady, the discipline of years etched into every line of his posture. A soldier without orders, a guardian without a post, and somewhere beyond the chain-link fencing, a man laughed at a joke that didn't carry, the sound hollow and distant, like it belonged to another world entirely. And for a moment, Rex's ears twitched, not at the laughter, but at the subtle shift of a door opening across the room, a draft of cool air slipping in, carrying with it the faint scent of something familiar, something buried deep beneath memory, something that once meant purpose. And his body tightened just slightly, not fear, not aggression, just recognition without clarity, the kind that lives in instinct rather than thought. And yet no one noticed, no one saw the way his stance changed, the way his weight shifted forward by a fraction of an inch, as if preparing for a signal that never came. Because to them, he was just another line item, another asset marked for liquidation, scheduled to be auctioned off at a price lower than a used television set. And when the clipboard man finally approached his cage, flipping through papers with disinterest, Rex did not move, he did not plead, because he had never been trained to beg, only to serve. And service without purpose is a quiet kind of disappearance, one that happens slowly, without noise, without witnesses, until all that remains is a body standing where it was told to stand, long after the orders have stopped. And as the man scribbled a number beside Rex's ID, assigning value where there was none understood, the overhead light flickered again, casting shadows that stretched across the floor like long, silent questions. And somewhere deep inside that stillness, something unspoken waited, not broken, not gone, just waiting, like a truth buried under layers of human decisions, like a story that refused to end the way it was written. And Rex, labeled rejected, priced to disappear, stood in the dim light with the quiet certainty of something that had not yet finished what it was meant to do. The auction began without ceremony. Just a folding table set beneath a buzzing light and a man with a clipboard calling out numbers in a voice that carried no weight, no meaning, as if each item on his list were no different from the next. And the room filled slowly with people who were not cruel, but not kind either. Ordinary faces with ordinary intentions, some looking for a bargain, others simply passing time on a gray afternoon that smelled faintly of dust and coffee. And Rex was let out on a short leash that had never belonged to him, the metal clasp clicking softly against his collar like a misplaced note in a song he once knew by heart, his paws steady against the concrete floor, each step measured, disciplined, as if he were still walking beside a handler who no longer stood there. And when he reached the center of the room, he stopped without being told, his body aligned, his head level, eyes forward, waiting, always waiting. And the man at the table glanced down at his sheet, clearing his throat with mild impatience. Police K9 unit, age 5, behavioral issues noted, he said, the words flat, stripped of context, stripped of truth, and a few people shifted in their seats, exchanging looks that said enough without speaking, because no one wants a problem, no one wants a dog that comes with a warning, even if the warning is only a shadow of something no one bothered to explain. And the bidding started low, lower than it should have, a number that felt more like a dismissal than an offer. And for A moment. No one raised a hand. The silence stretching thin and uncomfortable, until finally someone near the back lifted two fingers without much interest, not out of connection, not out of understanding, just because the price was easy to accept, and the man at the table nodded quickly, relieved to move on, calling for any higher bids, his eyes scanning the room with the same detached rhythm. But there was nothing, no second offer, no hesitation, just the quiet agreement that this was enough. That this was all the dog was worth, and Rex did not react, did not turn his head, did not search for a familiar voice, because somewhere deep within him, the absence had already settled, not as pain, but as a space where something used to be. And then, just as the gavel was about to fall, a sound broke through the stillness, not loud, not dramatic, just the faint scrape of a chair against the floor as someone stood, and the movement was small, almost unnoticed, except by Rex, whose ears shifted a fraction, whose eyes flickered just once toward the source, catching sight of a man standing near the far wall, hands in his jacket pockets, shoulders slightly tense, as if unsure why he had not remained seated. And Ethan Cole had not planned to be there, had not come looking for anything at all, but something about the dog, about the way he stood without resistance, without expectation, had settled into him in a way he could not ignore. Like a memory he had tried to leave behind but never truly did. And for a moment, Ethan hesitated, the room waiting without realizing it, the man at the table already preparing to close the sale. And then Ethan spoke, his voice steady but quiet, offering a number just slightly higher, not enough to impress anyone, not enough to draw attention, just enough to change the outcome. And the man at the table paused, surprised, repeating the bid as if testing its reality, glancing once more around the room for any challenge. But none came, because no one else cared enough to compete. And with a final nod, the decision was made, the sound of the gavel landing soft and unremarkable, marking the moment without honoring it, and the leash was handed over. Without ceremony, without explanation, as if transferring ownership of something simple, something easily defined. But as Ethan took hold of it, he felt the weight of it differently, not heavy, not yet, but present in a way that suggested more than what had been written on that paper sign. And Rex turned his head then, just slightly, his amber eyes meeting Ethan's for the first time, not pleading, not questioning, just observing, as if measuring something unseen. And in that quiet exchange, something shifted, not loudly, not completely, but enough to suggest that the story had not ended in that room, not even close. The drive home was quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar, not empty, but suspended, as if the air inside the truck held its breath between two lives that had not yet learned how to exist together. And Ethan kept both hands on the wheel, eyes forward, watching the long stretch of road unwind beneath the fading light of late afternoon. The sky painted in muted shades of gold and gray that blurred into the horizon like a memory he could not quite place. And beside him, Rex sat upright in the passenger's seat, not shifting, not settling, his posture exact, his gaze fixed ahead through the windshield, as if still scanning for threats that no longer had names, his ears flicking at distant sounds that never reached Ethan, responding to a world that moved just beyond human awareness. And the leash lay slack between them, untouched, unnecessary, because Rex did not move unless movement was required. And for miles, neither of them spoke, not that there was anything to say, just the soft hum of the engine and the rhythmic passing of road lines marking time in quiet increments. And Ethan found himself glancing over more than once, not out of concern, but out of something harder to define, a recognition that lived somewhere beneath thought, the same way you recognize a fellow soldier in a crowded place without knowing why. And when they reached the small house at the edge of town, a modest structure with weathered siding and a porch that creaked under its own history, Ethan turned off the engine and sat for a moment longer, the silence settling deeper now, heavier, like the pause before stepping into something that might change you. And Rex did not move until the door opened, until Ethan stepped out, then followed with quiet precision, his paws landing softly against the gravel driveway, each step measured, controlled, as if he were still on duty. And inside, the house carried the faint scent of coffee and old wood, a lived-in space that had known long stretches of solitude. And Rex entered slowly, not exploring, not curious, just observing, mapping the room with careful attention, noting the exits, the corners, the unseen lines that defined safety and risk, and Ethan watched him from the doorway, arms crossed loosely, unsure whether to give a command or let the silence do its work. And after a moment, he spoke, his voice low, steady. "You can relax," he said, though the words felt strange in his own mouth, like something he had not said in a long time, and Rex did not respond. Not because he did not hear, but because the command did not exist in his training, not in the way Ethan meant it. And instead, the dog moved to the front door and sat, positioning himself with his back to the room, eyes on the outside world, a silent sentinel guarding a threshold no one had asked him to protect. And something about that settled into Ethan's chest, not as frustration, but as understanding, because he had done the same once, standing watch long after the mission had ended, long after the others had gone home, unable to step away from a role that had defined him too completely. And he moved into the kitchen, pouring water into a metal bowl, the sound echoing lightly against the sink, then setting it down near the wall, and Rex turned his head, slightly, acknowledging it, but did not move to drink, not yet, not until something in the space told him it was permitted, and Ethan leaned against the counter, studying him, the lines of discipline, the quiet restraint, the absence of simple comforts like curiosity or ease, and he exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand across his jaw as if trying to shake loose a thought that would not fully form. And outside, a car passed by, its tires whispering against the pavement, and Rex's ears lifted instantly, body tightening just enough to signal readiness. And Ethan noticed, of course he did, because some things you never stop noticing. And in that small moment, standing in a house that felt both familiar and foreign, he understood something without needing it explained. This dog had not failed, not in any way that mattered. He had simply been left without a place to belong. And as the evening light faded through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor, the two of them remained therein, quiet parallel, not yet connected, not yet at ease, but no longer alone. And sometimes, that is where everything begins. The night settled in slowly, not with silence, but with a quiet layering of sounds that only became noticeable when everything else faded. The distant hum of a passing car, the soft ticking of the kitchen clock, the faint whisper of wind brushing against the siding. And inside the house, the dim glow of a single lamp stretched long shadows across the floor where Rex remained at his post by the front door, unmoving, unwavering, his outline sharp against the amber light. And Ethan sat on the worn couch across the room, elbows resting on his knees, a half-empty cup of coffee cooling in his hands, his gaze drifting between the dog and the window, as if trying to place something that refused to be named. And hours passed in that quiet standoff between instinct and uncertainty, neither of them crossing the invisible line that separated watchfulness from rest. And at some point, Ethan spoke again, his voice softer this time, almost hesitant. "You do not have to stay there all night," he said, not expecting a response, just testing the air between them. But Rex did not move, did not even shift his weight, because duty does not dissolve with words, not the kind that had been trained into bone and breath. And Ethan exhaled slowly, leaning back against the couch, eyes drifting upward to the ceiling where faint cracks traced lines like maps of somewhere he had been before. And in the stillness, something stirred inside him, not memory exactly, but the echo of it, the kind that comes uninvited, quiet at first, then persistent, until it fills the space you thought you had secured. And he closed his eyes for a moment, hearing again the distant rhythm of boots against gravel, the low murmur of voices in a place far from here, the weight of standing watch when everyone else had turned in. And when he opened them again, Rex was still there, still holding the line, still guarding something that no longer existed except in the shape of his own purpose. And it was then that Ethan stood, not quickly, not with urgency, just a decision unfolding in motion, and he crossed the room slowly, stopping a few feet away from the dog, careful not to crowd him, careful not to break whatever fragile understanding was beginning to form. And for a moment, neither of them moved. The distance between man and dog measured not in feet, but in trust that had not yet been earned. And Ethan lowered himself slightly, not fully kneeling, just enough to soften his presence, his hand resting loosely at his side, not reaching, not demanding, just there, open, and his voice came. Again, quieter now, almost steady with something deeper than instruction. "You are not on duty anymore," he said, the words carrying weight not because of volume, but because of what they meant to him as much as to the dog, and Rex's ears flicked once, a small movement, almost invisible, but enough to signal that something had shifted, not in obedience, not in surrender, but in awareness. And for the first time since entering the house, Rex turned his head fully toward Ethan, his amber eyes, meeting his, not searching, not questioning, just holding the moment as if measuring it against something internal, something that could not be rushed, and the silence stretched again, but this time it felt different, less like distance and more like space being made. And then, slowly, Rex stood, not stepping away from the door entirely, but adjusting, repositioning himself just enough that his body was no longer a barrier, just a presence. And it was a small change, barely noticeable to anyone else. But to Ethan, it felt like a door opening somewhere unseen, and he did not move closer, did not reach out. Because some things cannot be taken, they have to be given, and instead, he simply nodded. Once, as if acknowledging a decision that had been made without words, and stepped back, returning to the couch, and as the night deepened around them, something subtle settled into the space. Not comfort, not yet, but the beginning of it, fragile and quiet, like the first breath after holding it too long. And for the first time since he had entered the house, Rex lowered his head slightly, not fully resting, not fully letting go, but enough to suggest that maybe, just maybe, the watch did not have to last forever. Morning arrived quietly, not with alarm or urgency, but with a pale wash of light slipping through the thin curtains, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and distant pine. And for a moment, the house held that fragile stillness between sleep and waking, where nothing has fully claimed the day yet, and Ethan stirred on the couch, his body stiff from a night spent half resting, half remembering, his hand instinctively brushing against the empty space beside him as if checking for something that had once been there. And across the room, Rex was no longer at the door, and that absence was the first thing Ethan noticed, not with fear, but with a quiet alertness that rose before thought could catch it. And he sat up slowly, scanning the room, the corners, the windows, the subtle shifts of light and shadow that told him what had changed. And then he saw him, near the kitchen doorway, standing not as a guard now, but as something else, something less defined, his posture still, straight but softened, his head slightly lowered as if considering the space rather than defending it. And for a few seconds, neither of them moved, the moment suspended in a kind of silent recognition. And then Ethan stood, stretching out the tension in his shoulders, his bare feet pressing against the cool wooden floor as he walked toward the kitchen, the familiar creak beneath each step grounding him in a place that had long felt like a temporary stop rather than a home. And Rex watched him, not following immediately, but not turning away either, his attention steady, measured, as if learning something new with each small movement. And Ethan reached the counter, pouring fresh water into the same metal bowl, the sound clearer in the morning quiet, sharper somehow. And this time, when he set it down, he did not step back right away. He simply stood there, waiting without calling, and Rex moved, not quickly, not eagerly, just with purpose, crossing the space between them in a straight, deliberate line, his paws making soft contact with the floor. And when he reached the bowl, he paused, glancing once toward Ethan, not for permission exactly, but for something close to it, something that acknowledged the shift in control. And Ethan gave the smallest nod, almost imperceptible, and that was enough. And Rex lowered his head and drank, slow at first, then deeper, the rhythm steady, grounding, as if the act itself required recalibration after so long without simple certainty. And Ethan leaned back slightly against the counter, watching, not with curiosity now, but with a growing understanding that settled into him piece by piece, like something being rebuilt from memory rather than instruction. And when Rex finished, he did not return to the door. He remained where he was, standing within the space of the room, not guarding it, not claiming it, just existing inside it. And that, more than anything, felt different. And Ethan exhaled quietly, reaching for the old folder he had left on the table the night before, the one that came with Rex. Thin, unremarkable, filled with pages that had likely been skimmed and dismissed more times than read, and he opened it now with a kind of careful attention, flipping past the basic entries, the dates, the training logs, the evaluations marked in clipped, impersonal language, until something caught his eye, a report. Tucked between routine notes, its edges slightly worn, as if handled more than the others, and he read it slowly, his brow tightening not in confusion, but in recognition of something that did not match the label that had been given, the words describing an incident, not in detail, not in context, but enough to suggest that Rex had not acted without reason, that the behavior marked as unacceptable had been tied to something more complex, something that had not been pursued further, and Ethan glanced up then, his eyes finding Rex again, and the dog was watching him, not tense, not defensive, just present, as if aware that something important was being uncovered. And in that quiet kitchen, with morning light stretching across the floor and the faint hum of a new day beginning outside, Ethan understood that the story he had been handed was incomplete, not wrong, but unfinished, and as he closed the folder slowly, his hand resting on it for just a second longer, he realized that whatever had been left out was not gone. It was still there, waiting, just beneath the surface, like everything else that had not yet found its way back into the light. The rest of the morning unfolded without urgency, but something beneath it had shifted, something quiet and persistent, like a thread being pulled loose from a fabric that had once seemed intact, and Ethan found himself moving differently through the house, slower, more aware, as if each step now carried the weight of a question he had not yet fully asked, and Rex followed at a distance that felt intentional, not close enough to crowd, not far enough to disappear, his presence steady, his attention fixed in a way that suggested more than simple observation. And when Ethan stepped outside onto the porch, the air greeted him with a cool edge, the kind that wakes the senses without warning, carrying the scent of dry grass and distant pavement warming under the early sun, and Rex paused at the threshold, just for a second, his body still, ears forward, nose lifting slightly as if testing the world before stepping into it. And then he moved, silent and precise, falling into step beside Ethan without needing direction, and they walked the narrow path that led from the house to the gravel drive, the ground uneven in places, scattered with small stones that shifted underfoot, and Ethan stopped near the edge, looking out toward the quiet street where nothing seemed out of place, where the world moved on without knowing what had been left unresolved behind it. And Rex stood beside him, not scanning now, not searching, just present, until something changed, subtle at first, almost imperceptible, a tightening in his posture, a slight lift of his head, the kind of reaction that comes before thought, and Ethan noticed it immediately, because some instincts do not fade, they only wait, and he followed the direction of Rex's gaze, eyes narrowing slightly as he tried to find what the dog had already sensed, and then a car passed slowly at the far end of the road, nothing unusual in its movement, nothing that would draw attention from anyone else. But Rex did not relax, his focus locked, his body still but alert in a way that felt different from before, not defensive, not protective, but attentive with purpose, as if recognizing something not visible to the eye. And Ethan felt it then, that quiet shift in the air, the same kind he had felt years ago in places where things were never as simple as they appeared. And he glanced down at Rex, studying him more closely now, the line of his back, the angle of his ears, the way his breathing had slowed instead of quickened, controlled, deliberate, and it did not match. The description in the file did not match the label that had reduced him to a problem, and Ethan's jaw tightened slightly as the thought settled deeper, that whatever had been written about this dog had left out something critical, something that could not be measured on a report or dismissed with a stamp. And as the car disappeared down the road, Rex's posture eased just enough to signal the moment had passed, but his attention lingered, his gaze drifting back to Ethan briefly, as if confirming something without words, and Ethan nodded once, not consciously, just instinctively, the way you acknowledge a partner who has seen something you have not yet fully understood, and they stood there. For a moment longer, the morning light growing stronger around them, casting clear lines where shadows had been, and in that clarity, Ethan realized that this was not just about a dog adjusting to a new home. It was about a story that had been interrupted, redirected, and left unfinished. And as he turned back toward the house, Rex fell into step again, not behind, not ahead, but beside. and the distance between them felt smaller now, not in space, but in something harder to define, something that had begun quietly the night before and was now taking shape, not as trust yet, not fully, but as the beginning of it. And sometimes, that is how truth returns, not all at once, not loudly, but in small moments that refuse to be ignored, until eventually, they cannot be. By late afternoon, the light had changed again, stretching long and low across the quiet street, turning ordinary things into something softer, something almost reflective, and Ethan stood in the small front yard, one hand resting loosely at his side while the other held the worn folder he had not been able to put down, its edges bending slightly under the pressure of questions that refused to stay silent. And Rex was a few feet away, not pacing, not restless, just standing with that same measured stillness, his attention moving between Ethan and the distant edge of the road where shadows began to gather. And for a while, nothing happened, just the slow passing of time, the distant sound of a lawn mower somewhere down the block, the faint echo of a screen door closing, life continuing in its quiet, predictable rhythm. And then it shifted again, not in the world around them, but in Rex, a subtle tightening. A shift so slight it could have been missed by anyone who had not learned to notice the smallest changes, and Ethan saw it immediately, his posture straightening just enough to mirror the dog's alertness, his gaze following the line Rex had already drawn toward the end of the street. And there, parked just beyond the curve, was a dark sedan, engine off, windows reflecting the fading light in a way that revealed nothing of the inside, nothing of intent, just presence, still and watchful. And Ethan's breath slowed, not in fear, but in recognition of something that did not belong, something that lingered too long without reason. And beside him, Rex did not move, did not bark, but his focus sharpened in a way that felt deliberate, controlled, like a memory waking up inside him. And Ethan glanced down, studying him, seeing now what the file had tried to reduce, the precision, the restraint, the intelligence that had not been erased, only ignored. And without thinking, Ethan spoke, his voice low, steady. "What do you see?" he said, not as a command, not expecting an answer, just acknowledging the presence of something shared. And Rex's ears flicked once, his body leaning forward by the smallest fraction. And then he took a step, just one, toward the edge of the yard, not breaking into motion, not rushing, just positioning himself in a way that placed him slightly ahead of Ethan, not blocking, not shielding, but present in a way that suggested awareness beyond instinct. And the moment stretched, quiet and thin, the kind that feels like standing at the edge of something not yet defined. And then the car door opened, slowly, without urgency, and a man stepped out, his movements measured, unhurried, his gaze scanning the street before settling briefly in their direction, not long enough to be obvious, but long enough to be noticed. And Ethan felt that familiar weight settle into his chest, not panic, not tension, but the quiet readiness that comes when something unresolved begins to surface. And Rex did not react outwardly, did not break his stance, but his attention did not waver, not even for a second. And the man closed the door behind him, adjusting his jacket slightly, as if preparing for something casual, something ordinary. But there was nothing ordinary about the way he lingered, the way his eyes moved with purpose rather than curiosity. And Ethan stood still, not stepping forward, not retreating, just observing. And for a brief moment, the man's gaze met his directly. And in that exchange, something passed between them, not recognition exactly, but awareness, the kind that does not need words to exist. And then the man looked away, turning back toward his car, as if reconsidering whatever had brought him there. And after a pause that felt longer than it should have, he stepped back inside, the engine starting with a low hum that broke the silence just enough to remind them of its presence. And as the car pulled away, disappearing down the road as quietly as it had arrived, Rex remained still for a moment longer, his posture unchanged, his gaze fixed on the space where it had been. And then, slowly, he exhaled, the tension easing just enough to signal that whatever had been sensed had not yet ended, only passed for now. And Ethan let out a breath he had not realized he was holding, his eyes still on the empty road, his mind already turning over the pieces that no longer fit together. And when he finally looked down at Rex, there was no doubt left in his expression, no uncertainty about what stood beside him, because whatever this dog had been labeled, whatever had been written and dismissed, it was not failure, it was something else. Entirely, something that had been seen once and then deliberately ignored. And as the last of the daylight slipped away, leaving behind a quiet that felt heavier than before, Ethan understood that whatever story he had stepped into was no longer just about the past. It was unfolding again, right here, in ways that could not be turned away from. The evening did not fall all at once. It pressed in slowly, like a quiet hand over the world, dimming edges, softening lines, turning the familiar into something uncertain. And inside the house, the air felt different now, heavier with awareness, as if the walls themselves had begun to listen. And Ethan sat at the kitchen table with the folder open again, the thin pages spread beneath the low light, his fingers tracing lines that had once seemed ordinary but now carried weight, the kind that comes when truth begins to reveal itself not through what is written, but through what has been left out. And Rex lay a few feet away, not asleep, never fully asleep, his head resting low but his ears still attuned to the smallest shift in the environment. The steady rise and fall of his breathing the only sign of rest, and for a while, nothing moved except the quiet rhythm of time, until a sound broke through, soft at first, almost dismissible, the faint crunch of gravel outside, followed by the subtle click of a car door closing somewhere beyond the reach of the porch light. And Rex's head lifted instantly, not startled, not reactive, but precise, as if the sound had matched something stored deep within him. And Ethan noticed before he even turned, because the change in Rex was enough, always enough, and he stood slowly, not rushing his movements, deliberate as he stepped toward the front window, careful not to draw attention, his eyes adjusting to the dimness beyond the glass. And there, just past the edge of the yard, where the shadows thickened into something almost solid, a figure stood near the road, not moving, not approaching, just present in a way that did not belong to chance. And Ethan felt that same quiet tension settle into his chest, the kind that does not announce itself but lingers, waiting to be understood. And behind him, Rex had already risen, his body aligned with the direction of the unseen presence, not advancing, not retreating, just holding position with a stillness that carried purpose. And for a moment, the distance between them and whatever stood outside felt measured not in feet, but in intent, something unseen but undeniable. And Ethan spoke quietly, not to command, not to control, but to ground the moment. "Stay," he said, though the word felt unnecessary, because Rex was already exactly where he needed to be. And then, slowly, Ethan stepped onto the porch, the wood creaking faintly beneath his weight, the cool air brushing against his face as he moved just far enough to be seen, not challenging, not inviting, just present. And the figure shifted slightly, the outline becoming clearer in the dim light. A man, the same posture, the same quiet stillness that had lingered earlier on the street. And for a brief second, their eyes met again, and this time, the pause held longer, not accidental, not uncertain, but deliberate, as if something was being measured, reconsidered. And then the man spoke, his voice calm, controlled. "That dog," he said, not asking, not accusing, just stating. And Ethan did not respond immediately, his gaze steady, his posture unchanged. And behind him, Rex remained silent, but his presence filled the space in a way that could not be ignored, not aggressive, not threatening, but certain. And after a moment, Ethan answered, his voice even, "He is not going anywhere." And the words carried more than their meaning. They carried decision, and the man studied him for a second longer, something unreadable passing through his expression. And then he nodded once. Not agreement, not acceptance, just acknowledgement. And without another word, he turned, stepping back into the shadows, his figure dissolving into the darkness as quietly as it had appeared. And the sound of gravel followed again, softer this time, fading as distance reclaimed it. And Ethan remained on the porch for a moment longer, his eyes fixed on the place where the man had stood, the silence returning slowly, filling the space left behind. And when he finally stepped back inside, closing the door with a quiet click, Rex turned his head slightly, their eyes meeting in that same steady way. And something passed between them again, not spoken, not defined, but understood, Because whatever had followed Rex from the past had not come by accident, and whatever had been buried was no longer staying that way. And as the house settled once more into stillness, the night pressing gently against its walls, Ethan realized that this was no longer just about uncovering the truth. It was about standing with it, no matter what it chose to reveal. The night held steady after the door closed, not silent, but settled, like something that had reached a point of quiet understanding. And Ethan remained standing for a moment in the dim light of the living room, his hand still resting lightly against the door, as if feeling for something beyond it, something that had already moved on but left its presence behind. And Rex stood a few feet away, his posture no longer rigid, no longer locked into that unyielding line of duty, but not entirely at rest either, his body carrying a calm that came from awareness rather than tension. And for a while, neither of them moved, the weight of what had just passed lingering in the space between them, not as fear, but as clarity, the kind that does not arrive loudly, but settles slowly, piece by piece, until it cannot be ignored. And Ethan finally stepped away, exhaling quietly as he crossed the room, the old floorboards creaking beneath his weight, grounding him again in the present. And Rex followed this time without hesitation, not trailing behind, not guarding, just walking beside him with a rhythm that felt different now, less like duty, and more like choice. And they moved into the kitchen where the soft lights still glowed above the table, the folder resting there where Ethan had left it, open, unfinished, waiting. And he reached for it again, flipping through the pages one last time, not searching now, but confirming what he already understood, that whatever had been written about this dog had never been the full story, that somewhere along the line, truth had been set aside in favor of something easier, something cleaner, something that did not require explanation. And he closed the folder slowly, setting it down with a finality that felt earned, not forced. And Rex watched him, his amber eyes steady, present. And in that quiet moment, there was no question left between them, no uncertainty about what came next, not because everything had been solved, but because it no longer needed to be. And Ethan moved toward the back door, opening it to let in the cool night air, the scent of earth and distant trees drifting in, carrying with it a sense of space that the house had not held before. And Rex stepped out onto the small patch of grass beyond, his movements unhurried, his head lifting slightly as he took in the world around him, not scanning, not searching, just being. And Ethan leaned against the doorway, watching him, a faint line of tension easing from his shoulders as he realized that for the first time since bringing him home, Rex was not holding a position, not waiting for instruction. He was simply there, present in a way that did not require purpose to justify it. And after a moment, Rex turned back, meeting Ethan's gaze again. And there was something different in it now, not the sharp alertness of a working dog, not the guarded distance of something uncertain, but something quieter, steadier, something that did not need to prove itself anymore. And Ethan gave the smallest nod, the kind that carries more meaning than words, and stepped out to join him, the two of them standing side by side beneath the open sky, the stars faint but steady above them. And no one was watching, no one was measuring. No one was assigning value or writing reports, and maybe that was the point. Maybe some things are not meant to be recorded or explained, only lived. And as the night stretched on around them, calm and unbroken, Ethan reached down, his hand resting briefly against the thick fur at Rex's neck, not as a command, not as reassurance, just contact, simple and unspoken. And Rex did not move away, did not stiffen. He remained there, accepting it without hesitation. And in that small, quiet moment, something completed itself, not loudly, not with recognition or reward, but with the kind of grace that does not ask to be seen, only felt. And sometimes that is enough, sometimes that is everything.